like and what you don't like about the plan.
Piers, appreciate you having me on. It's an important day, it's an important week, and it is an important plan if it can stop the violence. I just want to say one thing about your intro. You said Hamas breached Israel's border on October the 7th. Technically, Israel is the only country I know of that doesn't define its borders. It breached the fence, but Israel has never said whether it accepts that Gaza is not Israeli territory. It is actually Palestinian territory. And that comes to the plan itself, which is a plan that Donald Trump tried to get signed off with Arab governments, as you know, Piers. And then when he released it, Israel had made some edits. So it's not great to have a plan that's written by Tony Blair and Jared Kushner and edited by Benjamin Netanyahu. Clearly, it's not great for the Palestinians. But in a situation where there is a genocide going on, people like myself, we want an end to the fighting. I'm not Palestinian. Let me just be very clear. Palestinians get to decide what happens to their future, whether they fight, whether they cease fire, whether they sign a peace deal. That is up to the Palestinian people. But just looking at it from an analytical point of view, there are good things in the plan. An end to the fighting, top of them, a resumption of aid, a release of hostages and detainees on all sides. We all want that, right? An end to starvation, we hope. By the way, the plan says that if the plan is agreed, aid will be fully resumed, which is a concession, Piers. The aid hasn't been fully resumed, right. Unlike all the Israelis who've been on your show and told you, oh, aid, there's enough aid. Well, why does the plan say that aid has to go up then, has to be resumed? Anyways, park that for a moment. Those are the good things. End to violence, end to starvation, I hope, would be the good things. The bad things are that it's a very colonial plan. A lot of Palestinians have described it to me as colonial. Tony Blair and Donald Trump should have nothing to do with the running of Gaza. This plan puts them on some board of peace. I think you and I would agree that Tony Blair has been nothing but a disaster for the Middle East. To bring him back here is insanity. And of course, when you look at the plan itself, Piers, it's not a peace plan, because peace requires a settlement to the conflict. It requires justice for the Palestinian people. It requires an end to the occupation. This plan does not do that, right? Netanyahu himself has told the Israelis there's nothing in this plan that says statehood. There's a vague mention of it, Piers, where it says if the Palestinian Authority reforms itself, if Gaza's redeveloped, if Israel decides there's no resumption of terror, then there will be a pathway to peace and statehood. It's all very vague. It's very conditional. It doesn't deal with the core issue, which I've been telling you on your show for over a year now, is the occupation. Hamas is not the core issue. Hamas is a symptom of the core issue. The core issue is occupation. And this plan does nothing for that. It also leaves Israel in control of at least 20% of the territory, maybe a majority. I mean, Amit Segal, who's a journalist very close to Benjamin Netanyahu, he said over the weekend, this leaves Israel in control of the majority of the Strip as long as we want.
Is it completely insane that somebody like him can form a group which at least supervise a transition, potentially, hopefully, to a place where Palestine gets a recognizable state of its own?
So, big picture, I think the entire idea of Trump, Blair, anyone else on this board is insane. The whole problem with Palestine is it's a legacy of colonialism. We don't need more Western colonialism. We need more self-determination. If you want to bring in local Arab countries, fine. Even that will be problematic. But really, it has to be led by people on the ground, not by outsiders. Donald Trump couldn't find Gaza on a map if his life depended on it. And Tony Blair, let me deal with Blair specifically. So, obviously, you and I opposed the Iraq War. It was a disaster. He lied. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a war crime. Tony Blair should be heading to The Hague, not to Gaza. I wrote a piece for Zeteo laying out the case against Blair being involved in the future of Gaza. People can read it at Zeteo.com. I will just be very brief and say this. He has hundreds of thousands of Arabs' blood on his hands. The idea that you would go to Gaza, where Arabs are being killed for the last 2 years, and that Blair, of all people, has any credibility with the Palestinian people. I've not met a single Palestinian who views him as anything other than a war criminal. And even if you put Iraq to one side, you mentioned his Middle East envoy role for the quartet between 2007 and 2015. It was a complete failure. Everyone agrees it was a failure. Go back and read the Financial Times editorial the day he resigned. They said it was a complete failure. He got nothing done. He was seen as just a proxy for the Israelis. He would say whatever the Israelis wanted. And that leads me to my last point. You rightly raised Northern Ireland. The reason he succeeded with Mo Mowlam and Clinton and Jonathan Powell and others in Northern Ireland is because Britain ended up being a fair broker. Both sides could trust them. Of course, both sides had their criticisms. The Unionists and the Sinn Féin side especially. But ultimately, Britain was trying to bring that conflict to an end in a way that involved talking to everyone. They've never applied that logic to the Middle East. Blair doesn't see Palestinians as equal to Israel. He is self-confessed a pro-Israel guy. This is the problem with all Western interventions when it comes to Palestine. They're never neutral brokers. The United States is not an impartial negotiator. To quote Aaron David Miller, a former Clinton negotiator, we are Israel's lawyer. That is what the US is. That is what the West is. That is certainly what Tony Blair is. So yeah, he doesn't have any credibility. And by the way, don't even get me started on the conflicts of interest. The guy makes money from deals every time he's in the Middle East. Him and Jared Kushner have no credibility. They're both making money on side deals in the Middle East while they're trying to bring supposedly peace and redevelopment to Gaza. Zero credibility, Piers. It'll end in tears.
Do you agree with the general consensus that Hamas can play no part in any government going forward in either Gaza or the West Bank?
Hamas agrees to that, Piers. So the difference between what Hamas has offered to Biden and what Trump has come up with, and this is where the big sticking point is, Hamas has always agreed to a hostage release deal, all for all, they call it. We'll release all the hostages if you release all the Palestinian detainees who you've illegally taken, including the ones since October the 7th, which are mentioned in this plan, thankfully. That's one thing they've always offered, and it's in this plan. The other thing they've always offered is we won't be part of government. Have an independent committee of Palestinian technocrats, independent, non-political folks, not from the PA, not from Hamas, not from Fatah. They agreed to that. Israeli negotiators have admitted they agreed to that. The Americans have admitted that. What's different in this deal is the demilitarization point, right? The Israelis added this in at the very late stage, which is you must give up all your weapons at the very beginning of this ceasefire. That's the sticking point, which Hamas in their statement on Friday, Piers, you saw, haven't signed up to. That's what they're going to be arguing about now in the coming days. But in terms of not being part of the government, Hamas already agreed to that, Piers. We could have had this deal under Biden. We could have had this deal in January when Trump came into office with his ceasefire that the Israelis then broke. This deal's been on the table, a version of it, for over a year and a half now. Matthew Miller, the former Biden State Department spokesman who you know, he said that. You know, that even there, Netanyahu came along and added poison pills. The Israelis have added poison pills throughout. Hostages' families, you've interviewed the families of hostages, I've interviewed the families of hostages. They've said it consistently that we could have had a deal, but Netanyahu and Ben Gvir Smotrich, they blocked it at every turn.